I've been inspired by the second half, and obviously the entire day I've heard from so many of you that it's been incredible. But family, you now get to lean in and hear from two exceptional and brilliant women that while they're from very different industries, they still have such a deep passion for making sure that we are elevating the discussion around women and how they grapple with power, how they find financial freedom, and how they are able to future-proof their legacy. And so that's what we're going to learn today, and I'm going to invite you all to make sure that you read the complete bios of both Nathalie and Margaret, who are joining us here from out of state, but they are very generously giving up their time and their expertise to fill our cup today. So Margaret and Nathalie, thank you so very much for joining us. Just so you all know, again, their titles and their bios are in your app, and that you can obviously read it, but also connect with them when you are able to see them this afternoon at the reception. I hope that you all get a chance to stay. So Nathalie, I want to dive right into the conversation and begin with you. Briefly introduce yourself, your organization, but then I want to make sure that we show up with all of our heart in this panel. Let's talk about why. Why are you passionate about women and money? And what is it about legacy? How do you define it? And how is it tied to your work?
I'll start with the easy one.
Yeah.
When I think about my why, and I have to say, after doing a workshop earlier today and feeling the energy in this room, I'm especially excited because I can see that there are a lot of people whose why is similar. It comes from family, it comes from love, it comes from things that really matter and are deep. And so for me, it goes back to a story that I remember growing up with. It was one of my first memories. My father told me a story about growing up in Ecuador, in a family where, just as happenstance, DNA, he was born the most light-skinned of his siblings, which in places throughout the Americas where we struggle with colorism is a meaningful, real thing. And I remember him telling me a story of being poor, I knew this, and having an aunt who was well-to-do, or who had started to come up in the world economically, and she belonged to a tennis club. And she would come by the house, and she would pick up my dad, and she would take him to the tennis club for the day and parade him around like he was a new fancy bag. And I remember hearing that story a couple of times as I was little. It was one of my earlier memories. And then I remember getting old enough where I had formulated my opinion about this. And I decided that I was confused about why my grandmother would allow that to happen to my dad. And I was just old enough to formulate my thoughts, and I finally got the courage to ask my beloved grandmother. For those of you who snatched up every copy of my book today, you'll see my book is dedicated to her. I asked her, I said, Abuelita, why would you do that or allow that to be done to my father? And she sat me down, and I'm so glad I participated in the trauma and money workshop earlier too, because you see that surface in these conversations. She said to me, Mamita, I let my sister take him to the tennis club whenever she wanted because that day I knew he would eat well.
Wow.
And I think that what that brings home is you never know anyone's money story.
Right.
Whether you come from wealth or you come from poverty, there is potential for trauma, for just healing.
Yes.
And then the second thing that comes to my why is everything that I do is in the hopes that we can build a new system of finance where no mother and no child ever has to go through what they did.
Excellent. Oh, yes. Can we give Nathalie a round of applause? Thank you.
And so to answer your question, I'm a recovering tech entrepreneur turned educator and now turned owner of an investment bank and an asset manager. We manage money for large endowments, for families. We help business owners sell, buy companies, raise money for their businesses. We focus on scaling businesses because there are a lot of people doing amazing work in boutique, small-scale ways, which are really important. Every little drop in the bucket is meaningful. But I want to create the next BlackRock, the next Goldman. I want to create a titan of industry that is inclusive and that is built for people like my grandmother and my father.
Excellent. Thank you. Nathalie, this was exactly what I had hoped for, right? Yes, we're going to talk about strategies for building our wealth, but we have to first remember the why. That's so critical. So thank you for sharing your heart and your vulnerability. And Margaret, we invite you to do the same. Tell us a little bit about your work, but your why.
I'm going to use the F word when I talk about my why.
It's Utah, Mama. Just so you know. I just want to make sure. Just want to make sure we're clear.
And that is being a feminist.
That F word. Yeah.
And sometimes the word feminist can be a very polarizing word in and of itself. That it really, at its core, means that you are investing in the empowerment of women. Feminism is not a gender. It is a way in which we approach the ability to understand, believe, and do that women are equal, powerful, unstoppable. And that is my why. I believe it, I want it, I see it, I know it to be true. And I want to do everything I possibly can before I leave this earth to do my part in making sure that all women are equal, powerful, and unstoppable.
Do you see why she was invited, why they both were? Margaret, I'm so grateful that you mentioned that and that you framed it that way. I've been so thankful for Maddie and for, obviously, Jackie and the vision that they have for SheMoney. And they are unapologetic about wanting women to rise and to thrive. And so this conversation is so relevant this entire day. And I've also really appreciated that both of you have discussed this idea of legacy as part of your description for today. And I want to acknowledge that Jackie was really intentional about the scholarships that we gave our emerging leaders because she wants to make sure that all women, every woman, that our babies, our next generation, right? Our next generation is prepared to understand their legacy. So let's continue with the conversation. And Nathalie, I'd love if you could talk to us a little bit about your company, Known. And as I was looking at your website, I noticed that your logo, there's a slight emphasis around the word own. But I also really appreciated that I was reading through that, and it says that your singular goal is to build things that last and serve as vehicles for multi-generational prosperity. Tell me about the importance of helping champion ownership and how it shows up in the work that you do at OWN every single day.
Well, first of all, thank you for saying yes. I mean, just to be on stage with the likes of Margaret is an honor. I think about building things that last, and I think that it's not a coincidence that Margaret is here. Right. She'll tell us more about some of the multi-generational structures that she is now at the helm of running, and those are the inspirations. And so, I think a lot about who hasn't heard the term, or who has heard the term representation matters, right? We hear it all the time. And I think it does. I am not in disagreement. But I often wonder if, similar to somebody who's climbing Mount Everest, we might not have stopped at Base Camp 1, got really excited about the fact that we hit that milestone and celebrated it, and forgotten that we were trying to get to the top of the mountain. Because to me, representation is important, it's necessary. You got to get to Base Camp 1 before you get to the top of the mountain, but it is not the top of the mountain. And I worry that we celebrate a woman becoming president of a hospital. We celebrate a woman becoming a C-suite, joining a board. We celebrate all of these important milestones, but then we don't ask the question, but how much of that hospital does she own? How much of that company did she get in stock options? We stop at the celebration of representation, and where I would like for us to focus is around ownership. I feel like ownership is the next threshold. It's where we naturally have to go after we pass, Base Camp 1. And I think that that's why we put so much emphasis on the idea of ownership, on the idea that, for example, worldwide, all the world's capital is managed, less than 10% of it is managed by women or people of color. That's not a stat we hear very often. We're distracted sometimes by the wage gap, by the wealth gap, by these things that are about making money, not securing legacies, not creating ownership. So it's not that the wage gap doesn't matter, it's not that the wealth gap doesn't matter, it's that let's include in that conversation, how much do you own? How much ownership is included in that salary package? You know, there's a reason I don't agree with his politics or really much of anything, but there is a reason that Elon Musk said no when he was offered a board position at Twitter. Because you can be fired from a board. You can't be fired as the owner of anything. And that's what I want for women.
Yes, go ahead. Let's go ahead and celebrate that. Absolutely. You know, and we want that for the women in this room who are here, who are present, who are engaged and leaning in. But what I absolutely loved about Eve's comment, you know, in her video, we know that in order for us to get to a place where we are confident and emotionally empowered to own something, we also have to be free of the violence that harms us. And so, Margaret, I want to talk to you about multi-generational prosperity. She talked about it from the business community. I want to talk to you through the lens of safety, healing, and what that means for the impact of your organization. And before you do that, I do need to give a shout out to Liz Owens, who is the YWCA of Utah CEO. So can we, that's right, to our sister. Thank you, Margaret, go ahead.
My heart is palpitating a little bit because my son did summit Mount Everest a couple of years ago. And, you know, base camp, I was really cool. And then there's, you know, Camp 2. And then there's something called the Death Zone. And I was almost not breathing. And when they summited, and he was part of an all-black expedition, not only that, but the crew that took them up, the amazing, amazing people that took them up, was a Nepalese firm. And just the ownership of the Nepalese firm when so much of that had been taken away from the Nepalese people. And the ownership, it's not just the representation, but the ownership to make all of that happen is absolutely incredible and heart-stopping. So I was a little triggered at Mount Everest in base camp. But yes, you know, the YWCA and Nubia, as you just mentioned, just an amazing team here led by Liz Owens, and the work that they do is just absolutely incredible. And the work of the YWCA, we are a global movement, and nationally we're in 45 states and the District of Columbia here in the US. And, you know, what we have to do, you talked about that compassion, that healing, and so much of this day, we have really sort of been centered in our bodies and understanding ourselves and women. And what I want to say about the work we do as a movement is really about understanding and caring for the other, those that everyone else others. And we do that through a racial equity lens and a gender equity lens. But at the core of that, it is that we see the other. And we do our work in a way that is, you know, we're in the middle of a tsunami of homelessness.
Right.
A tsunami of homelessness. And it is real. And we have to be able to work together in order to, and I believe that is solvable. We have an epidemic of gender-based violence. Gender-based violence, an epidemic. And that work, the tsunami of homelessness, the work that Liz and her team does at YWCA Utah, they are meeting that need. And we also do work in the space of childcare. And, you know, we don't even consider childcare a profession in this country. We don't really see what it takes to begin the journey for children, and that this is a profession. And so our work that we do is minimized. That's how we are able to care for the other so well, because we are often in our own work not seen, not heard, not understood, not valued, not capitalized, and we see it, and so we are able to understand and meet people where they are and help secure them to that next place. And so, Liz, if you haven't been to visit YWCA Utah, you'll see their housing, their childcare, their deep work in the space of gender-based violence, and you begin to understand how critically it is important to be able to care for those that are built out of the system. Sometimes we personalize and want to make someone's situation their individual fault, and we have to understand that beyond the bootstraps, there are systems in place that prevent individuals from being able to thrive. And all of this, the financial piece, the financial trauma piece, all of this is wrapped in our ability to lift. And it's our responsibility together to lift as we climb.
Powerful. Thank you so much, Margaret. And I just appreciate so much that you're talking about the populations, not only that we don't even see. And our aging population. When you talk about homelessness, the intersections of our homeless aging population has grown exponentially. Because their social security might not necessarily match with the housing inflation. So let us continue to hold space, family, for the people that exist at the farthest margins. And let us ask the question, right, Margaret? What can we do to stand in the gap? And that's exactly what the YWCA does. So thank you for your mission, your leadership, and for the expertise you're bringing today, Margaret. Thank you. So Nathalie, okay, we talked a little bit about the fact that we need to have safety in order to be able to thrive. You've been on Wall Street. You've got an entire experience. You've been in the tech industry. Most women in the room, not all, but the majority might not necessarily ever own a bank, right? But wait, we might change that, right? That's what we're here to do. We're gonna change that. But I wanna make this conversation relatable. I want to be able to make sure that every single woman leaves here knowing that we can demystify money and owning capital and assets and actually having control and becoming part of that network. How do we do that? How do we take the fear out of this conversation?
I mean, I think it's surprising how much power we actually have as individuals, right? I'm thinking about the largest sources of capital, right? Be they in pension funds, right? Be they my alma mater, Columbia University, has an endowment of $10 billion. $10 billion endowment. And I think about a school like that, and I think about, for example, the student body. The student body, I think, years ago, crossed the line of being more than 50% women. But if we look under the hood and we start asking questions, which, by the way, no one is used to answering, but it would be really interesting if a lot of us picked up the phone and called up our alma maters and we started asking questions like, most of the student body at Columbia University are women. Are more than 50% of the people managing that $10 billion endowment women? And if not, we already know the answer. Why? I went to your school. My friends went to your school. Maybe a few of us pick up the phone and we ask these sorts of questions. If you're a part of a pension fund, a retirement fund, whether if a pension fund is managed by someone else, but you're a part of that, you're that audience. I'm thinking about recently reading that the Los Angeles Police and Fire Department, which is 60% people of color, I don't suspect that 60% of the people managing that very big pension fund look like the people that contribute to that pension fund. What would it look like if the way that we call our members of Congress when we're not happy, we do the same thing and we pick up the phone and we call the pension fund that our retirement is housed in and we ask questions like this? What would it look like if we asked our favorite nonprofit, who manages your endowment, right? I contribute on a regular basis to the local NPR station or whatever the thing is that you particularly love, the Boys and Girls Club, the various different organizations that are a part of the fabric of your world. What does it look like when you ask them questions like, first, do you have an endowment? And second, who manages it? Does it look like us? Do they manage according to our values, whatever your values may be? Those are questions that the average person who happens to buy, Girl Scout cookies, who happens to have gone to this college or that college, or who happens to work in an organization that has a union or a pension fund, these are all things that we all have immediate access to. And what's beautiful about it is that unlike our members of Congress who are used to getting the angry phone calls from us whenever we're not happy, these folks are not. And how interesting would it be if we made them all either a little bit uncomfortable because the answers they're giving us aren't adequate, or simply broach the conversation that they're not used to addressing. What does it look like when they have to come up with answers to a whole bunch of women asking questions about who's managing that money, how are they managing that money, and does it abide with my values, and do they look like me?
Powerful. So really the invitation and the encouragement is learn that you have the power and the right to ask questions, and know what questions to ask. So make sure that that's part of the reception hour. Take down notes, lean in, and ask Nathalie, where should I start? And actually, let me go there for a moment. Yeah. Where should they start, Nathalie? What would be a good place for people to lean into this with curiosity, but again, demystifying this so that it's not so terrifying, like they can do this?
I think that one of the things that can sometimes be daunting is if you don't come from this world, you might not know what are the titles, right? I mean, we talked about this a little bit in my workshop, that I'm a big believer in making it plain. You got to use terminology that is not about dumbing down, that is about making accessible, making it so that everybody understands what you're talking about. And we're infamous in the finance industry for doing the exact opposite, making things as convoluted and as confusing and as jargon-filled as possible. And so look for who's the chief investment officer. Who is the outsourced chief investment officer? Who is the vice president of finance? Who is the vice president in charge of investments? These are the sorts of titles that can sometimes not be readily evident to us, but you look for those sorts of names, you look at them within, who's managing your 401k? Is it, whatever organization is managing your 401k, call that 1-800 number, find out who are the people in charge of deciding who manages my money. It's my money. It's my retirement money, right? It's my savings account. It's my whatever. Figure out within those organizations some of these titles, and I'm happy to help give some of those. I mean, some of the ones that I just cited are important, but it's unique to each organization. There are some standard titles and things like the ones that I mentioned. I would say be curious, and what's great is, again, these are not people like members of Congress where they have entire staff just ready to get your phone calls. You will more likely get a warm reception from these folks because they're just not used to it. They don't have people whose entire job is just to field your phone calls. And what is it going to look like when a bunch of us do? So I would say that's the first step. Call those 1-800 numbers to wherever your retirement is being managed. Figure out who the head of investments are at the nonprofits that you love. And get in touch with the people who would know the answers to these questions and be curious.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Nathalie. And you set us up beautifully for the next question for you, Margaret, because you are about to celebrate the 100-year anniversary of the YWCA Pension Fund. And your team has actually created something very unique. It's called is it Women? Can you tell us more about this, and how can people actually get involved? What does this mean for your organization, and tie it back to legacy?
Yeah, just about 6 years ago, we had an opportunity with an investment firm to create a ETF, an electronic transfer fund, and it was so funny because about 7 years ago, I joined a wealth management firm for my own finances that was all female, and I started telling my planner about our ETF woman, WOMN, and she's like, Margaret, we have you in ETFs. What are you talking about? And ETFs are just a great way, but our ETF, Woman, is all about women. And the companies that are in Woman are companies that have agreed to put their organization through the index that identifies them as a pro-woman organization, that they are living the values for women. And there have been companies in the fund that have not always lived up to that, and we've been able to, write letters and encourage them. We did that with the railroad. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank other than it's late.
The Dakota Pipeline?
Uh,
Or the...
No, it was the actual railroad company.
Okay.
And we were able to push them toward sick pay and maternity leave in a way that was just largely far more equitable for the women in that organization. And so our ETF is Morningstar rated. We're getting ready to be about 6 years old. We have about 54 million AUM, assets under management, and we're really proud that we can not only do grassroots work, but also that we're doing work at the treetops that are impacting women. And you mentioned, Nathalie mentioned the pension, and you mentioned 100 years. In 1924, the Rockefellers gave funding to both the YM and the YW. We are no longer married. We did get, you know what. And
consciously decoupled?
We consciously decoupled with, thank you. We consciously decoupled with the YMCA. But in 1924, Rockefeller Foundation gave an equal amount to both organizations, which is really sort of radical in so many ways. And it was to start a pension fund. And even as in the 80s, when so many corporations were moving away from pension funds, because it's a large, expensive endeavor, the YWCA held true. It's an incredible benefit. Social Security for so many women in our country. And 1924 is 10 years before Social Security was established in the United States.
Wow.
And when Social Security was established, all employees, all workers didn't have full access to Social Security. Domestics were excluded, and we know who was involved in that field. And agricultural workers were excluded, and we know who was involved in that field of work. And so the beginning of Social Security in and of itself was not even equitable. And I have to tell you that I stood in the office of our retirement fund determined to figure out if women of color, if women who look like me were included originally in the fund. So here I am going through longhand ledgers from 1925. And finally, I could tell by the church and the denomination. And also in the upper right-hand corner, there would be a very large capital C for colored. But I can't tell you what it felt like to know that all women within the YWCA movement were included in the pension fund. And this pension fund
From the beginning.
From the
very beginning, right?
is really huge and powerful. So yes, we're very proud of the ETF. It's unusual for a nonprofit to have an ETF woman, and anyone can access it. You can purchase it. Your financial planner, your wealth manager can purchase it, and investors can, but individuals can as well. And
I didn't want to steal Margaret's thunder when you asked me what people could do, because the one thing about this ETF, and any other, there are others, of course, that are values aligned, is just that you were mentioning how much assets under management currently?
54 million, yeah.
And you have enough power to sway an organization when they're not necessarily living up to your values to be able to come to them and say, we're a shareholder, we believe in these values, and we need you to live up to them.
That's
and
right.
I just think of something like that. What happens when that ETF gets to 100 million, 200 million,
Yeah.
$500 million? What happens when all of us go into our Fidelity, Vanguard, wherever it is we happen to have our 401k, and we put our little nest eggs partly into something like this?
Yeah.
And how loud does that voice get if enough of us rally around products like this?
Incredibly powerful. You're talking about right there, the YWCA's legacy. 10 years before Social Security even was created, was already thinking about the advancement of all women.
Yeah.
Right? And what I'm excited about what you just shared is the innovation that was required to think outside the box, because to your point, nonprofits don't usually do this.
Yeah.
But what happens when every single person in this room starts to tap into their creativity, right? The ability to stand in the gap and to ask the question, what could I do to build a legacy where 100 years from now, they're gonna be talking about this. So we only have one more moment to wrap up our conversation, and I'd really love if you could each take 30 seconds to tie it back to our discussion and encourage individuals in the room to think strategically about next steps they can take to future-proof their legacy. Margaret, I'll start with you. What would you recommend?
I just want to say how important I think wills are for women. And, this is just a legacy opportunity. I think they're incredibly important for the organizations that you care about, the family that you care about. And so often we don't see wills as a way to transfer legacy. And it's an important and powerful way to do it. And so I just encourage you, there's so many vehicles, so many different price points, and free to be able to do it. But having a will is one of the most empowering things, powerful things that we can do.
Thank you.
Didn't the goodie bag have a coupon for a free will? I believe
Did it?
Jackie
Oh my gosh.
Jackie thought of it.
Jackie's like
I
10
love
steps
it.
ahead of us, and she already included that in
Oh my
everybody's goodie
goodness,
bag.
I wasn't all in it, but yes, fantastic.
Same question, I imagine.
Please, yes, absolutely. What recommendation would you give?
Something that Margaret said, I think it was this morning, inspired me to change what I was going to say, and that is that Margaret was talking about an example. Margaret does not come from finance, and yet she is a trustee in the pension fund for the YWCA, and most recently, she requested to sit and be an observer in the finance committee.
In the investment committee.
In the investment committee, excuse me. And what that inspired me to think is just that any of us can join the boards of organizations that we love. And over time, like Margaret, we can ask to be sitting in those rooms where the investment committee is meeting, where the finance committee is. You don't have to be a finance guru to know in your heart of hearts what feels right, what organizations are behaving badly, what sorts of things you would like to see. And you partner with people who are in the room, who do maybe understand the jargon and who can help you along the way, but there is absolutely nothing preventing all of us from joining the boards of these organizations that we love, who, by the way, many times have things like these pension funds, these endowments, these large sources of capital that have the ability to make a huge difference in all of our lives, and that more importantly have the ability to hire more women, to make sure that women have benefits like, maternity leave and so on and so forth. That money moves mountains, and the people that are caretaking that money don't look like us today, but if each of us go and we become part of these boards, little by little, we can actually start to move the needle. And I would say it's not as complicated as you think. You have a favorite nonprofit, figure out who their board is, figure out when they're recruiting new board members, talk to some people in that organization, and let them know that you're interested in being next.
Excellent. Thank you so very much, Nathalie and Margaret. The conversation was beautiful because, again, you remind us that we can take tangible steps to not only ensuring that our future is secure, but that we're building a legacy that helps others. Family, I hope that you are leaning into the recommendations, ask questions, remain curious, and again, know that you can do so much to future-proof your own legacy for those to come after us. So thank you again. Let's give them a round of applause.